Bonjour. Je vais présenter en anglais parce que j'ai compris que c'était la langue la plus comprise aujourd'hui, mais j'invite les questions en français. Voilà, donc moi, la relation de ce que je vais parler avec ces questions de territoire et de One Health, on peut penser à la question du land squeeze que Julia a discuté il y a un instant. Si on pense au... and I said I would talk in English. Oh yeah, it's actually doing the job correctly. Okay, so, all right, reset, English. So if we think about the question of land squeeze, which we just heard about, in the context of agro-industrial food systems, the increasing demand for land globally for export commodities is creating situations in many countries where you have a massive conversion of land for things like soybeans and corn and meat production. And so this is one of those contexts that I'm going to talk about today, and specifically after some years looking at the dynamics of frontier expansion, of deforestation, of the expansion of these communities. Here I want to talk a little bit about how this is experienced locally by people who live in these places where that system expands and how they react to that. And so I'm going to talk about a place called the Gran Chaco, and specifically the Paraguayan part of the Gran Chaco. And this is a place that is mostly not on top of people's minds. 100 years ago, it was sort of in the news because there was a big war, the first major war of the 20th century, opposing Bolivia to Paraguay over ownership of the Chaco. And then it kind of faded away from people's consciousness outside of the region for a pretty long time, until today people start thinking about it again because it is one of the places with the highest rates of deforestation in the world. And so that's what people now imagine thinking about the Chaco. So there's a couple of maps here showing you that reality a little bit. And basically, all you need to know is that red and brown is land that's converted from forests to agriculture and to cattle ranching. And so you see 85 to 2000 and 2000 to 2013, that's a bit outdated. But you can see there's been a massive change. The third map there shows a recent study that looks at isolated settlements in the forest. So those are households, people, families living in the forest, usually kind of spaced out. And it shows the disappearance and persistence and a little bit of emergence of these isolated homesteads. And the basics of this is that it might not be entirely clear there, but there was a massive disappearance of these families living in the forest associated with the expansion of agricultural frontiers. So there's about 20% of the total number of forest homesteads that disappeared over a period of 30 years, and even a higher percentage in Paraguay, which is what I'm going to focus on. And when you look at the reality of these frontiers and who's behind all this is food systems, but really it's also speculation and investments, right? And so this is ongoing work, so I'm just showing this, but it's not final, but these are attempts at categorizing who's behind these investments. And you've got a lot of Paraguayans, but you also a lot of other people from all sorts of places, Korea, Brazil, Uruguay, and so on, a lot of them with ties to other sectors. So those people are industrialists, doctors, people who invest in land in the Chaco and produce food, but also are there for other reasons mostly. Yet this really has very serious consequences for those people that are on that other map that I was showing you and increasingly disappearing from that landscape. And so there's a really deep transformation of the landscape. And if we're talking about healthy, like territoire en santé, or like the themes for today, this is really changing the nature of that territory. So I'm going to have to be quite brief, but I'm talking about this place here. This is Paraguay, and the little shaded area here is where I've conducted some field work in the last 5 years or so, repeatedly going through that area because it is at kind of the nexus of these pressures of like high conversion and then also a lot of different people living in that area, which makes it interesting. So I've been asking questions about how is life going in that context, basically. And I can tell you more about the methods, but I think we can move on for now. This is what things things look like in that area. That's my friend, an assistant, repairing a motorbike as we're trying to get around. And this is the Pilcomayo River, which is kind of central in that territory. And the reality of that transformation there usually comes through the erection of fences, right? Suddenly you have fences appearing in the territory that demarcate private properties and often enclose places where people live, or if they didn't live within those places, places that they were using for their livestock or for other uses of the forest. And so this is a house here in the background which found itself inside a property of a Uruguayan investor in the area. And so if you look at that from above, you see an increasing encroachment of these very large properties, which are appearing in sort of clear whitish there over the territory. And so this is a pretty massive change in a few years, right? It's 1990 to 2020. And this is one example of a property not formally owned by a family, but it was, they had a claim on that land, semi-formal, and then progressively the encroachment around that property, but also within it. And then the latest, last time I went, those people had to leave because they couldn't no longer live in that property. So this is kind of the dynamics of what's going on there. Now, what I addressed in recent work, and I'm gonna again have to be very brief on that, is okay, so all this is happening. What are people doing? What's people's agency in the face of these changes? And there's been a lot of literature on dispossession, land grabs, right? Especially since 2008 when there was this big land rush. And not a lot of discussion of the sort of grassroots responses to that, except for resistance and organizations and stuff. That's one area that's been discussed a lot. So here I wanted to see, okay, talk to a bunch of people and see what each of these people are doing concretely in response to that. And I'll give you a little bit of a very quick breakdown of these different strategies. So you've got a few strategies that have to do with trying to prevent the loss of land and access to territory. So this is about responding to the loss of territory and loss of land. People realize that they will only be protected if they have land titles. This is the only thing that really matters, and even then it might not always matter ultimately, but so people try to preventatively find a way to title land. This has been very difficult because it's very expensive. They often don't have good access to lawyers. There's a lot of betrayal from lawyers, kind of getting the info and siding with big investors, so it's very difficult. It still is maybe the best response, but also one of the most difficult ones. A lot of times people are faced with an investor who comes and claims, this is now mine, get out, like I need this land. And they have the option theoretically to say, I've been here for a long time, you can't kick me out like that. There are legal provisions for that. Like if you've been there for over 20 years, for example, legally you have the right to stay there. That is also very difficult, depends on the justice system that's really rigged against the small guy, and so rarely really works. Resistance is what people kind of like to talk about more, and so there's organized resistance and there's personal levels of resistance. There's been very little of that, a little bit, and it hasn't worked very well, or just very microscopic achievements in the area. Then you've got strategies that have to do with mitigation, trying to, if it's going to happen, make the most out of it, and so maybe negotiate some financial benefit, or using a little bit more of the land, even after most of it is taken by investors. What I call brokerage, which is people realizing that they can make a profit by siding with these outside investors, and this is maybe something that people don't like to talk about as much, but there are people who position themselves in that way to make a profit. Yes, I have 3 minutes. And some sort of covered everyday resistance of still using the land, even though it's private, trying to get away with some amount of use illegally, but also very difficult. And then you've got different adaptation responses, intensifying the use of the land. So for example, clearing some of the forests to put exotic pastures, like the big ones, like the investors, as a way to use less land, diversifying into other non-land related activities, relocating, just leaving the area. A lot of times people are not really interested in getting into conflicts with people who are so much more powerful than them, so they might just decide it's not worth the trouble, I'm just going to leave and not ask for anything. And sometimes they do get a compensation. So you've got a little bit of all of these things. And what I did here was to kind of show these on a timeline. And I think what this shows, just in brief, it shows a bunch of stuff, but it shows one, you've got these little red men there. That's each time that a family was faced with someone saying, get out of here, this is mine. And you can see there's a lot of those. So a lot of these people are confronted with people wanting them out. You can also see that each family or person uses a diversity of strategies. It's usually not just one. And these are among I think the interesting things from this study. And I'm already at the end of my 10 minutes, so I'm going to be relatively... I can take 2 more minutes. That's fantastic. Thank you. That's because I started at 5 So I think a few take-home points here. I tried to focus this on agency and what people do. However, in the end, a lot of it didn't really matter in this context because the power imbalances were so great. What does matter, I think, is that ultimately what people choose to do kind of shapes the territory, and you do have some differences. So most of the people who actually faced an investor saying this is mine had to give up something, either part of the territory or they just had to leave entirely. There are a few people who never faced those claims, and those are people who were kind of visionary and got their land titles very early when everyone thought it was useless. Sometimes people who have stuff land that's not that interesting to investors. And then, some people manage to avoid being entirely evicted. Maybe they stayed on a piece of land. If they signed agreements, almost always under pressure. If the land claims weren't covering all of their territory, and then they can stay on a little piece and try to make a living there. It's not easy. And in some cases, I talked to people where the conflict was just not yet resolved, so it's up in the air. We don't really know what's going to happen. And so, because these claims are repeated, there's a sort of erosion over time where people face one claim and maybe they kind of manage to stay there and still use some of the territory. And then comes another guy and another and another. And over time, this is really eroding their capacity to respond. I think if you zoom out a little bit, what that also means is that in people's responses, even when they're not evicted, when they're able to stay, they still have to shift their way of doing and their livelihoods in a way that alters the landscape. And so you've got a process of deforestation and land grab, but you've also got in the remaining forest a process of change that's really altering how people do things and what kind of landscapes, what kind of life is lived also in those landscapes. And and so I'm actually done. And so I think this is interesting because that's kind of a spillover of these processes where the whole landscape is changing, even though from a satellite image you might only see some of that changing. So I'm going to leave it at that, and thank you all for your attention.
I think I will speak in English since it's more commonly spoken here. So I will present something that is a bit related to what Victor presented a bit earlier on the contamination of a food source. In his case, it was in Vietnam with the agricultural products, but here it will be country food, and we will go up north on Inuit land. So contaminants, chemical contaminants, can get up north, even in the high Arctic, through long-range atmospheric transport that has been known for a long while. And so you have different types of contaminants that can do the traveling, the transport. So you have persistent organic contaminants that are regulated by the Stockholm Convention, and it's still a problem. So, for instance, pesticides or that's what anyway, a bunch of these chemicals are getting up north through different processes, but also some metals, not many, but some of them, particularly mercury, that is really able to go up north because it has a volatile phase. So it's kind of a gas, it goes up north, then it can be deposited there, and sometimes it comes from very far away, for instance, from power plants in China that are using coal. It's a good source for the high Arctic. And then you have new contaminants, such as microplastics, that can do the traveling, and you can also have oceanic transport. Once they arrive in the north, they can undergo a series of transformation in the land. For instance, here you have the case of mercury that can be modified by bacteria in the land up north, be modified into a neurotoxin, methyl mercury, and then it can go up the food chain in the north. And at each level, between the predator and the prey, there will be an increase in concentration. So that's biomagnification. And at the end, you may have an increase by 100 million times the concentration that you had in water. So it's a really efficient transfer. And at the end, people are collecting these animals and eating them. And again, it's another transfer. So up goes the concentration again. And for mercury, but also for other contaminants, we have those maps that can be done for the concentration of the contaminant in the blood of people. And here it's a study by Neil Basu from 2022, they have integrated the data over years. So you have bigger circles that represent older concentrations and darker symbols that represent newer ones. So good news, there is kind of a decrease, but still the levels are going down, possibly because of a change in diet, not necessarily because the contamination decreases and the food is cleaner. And you can see that the big circles are really up north. So it's not the farther you are from the contamination source, the safer you are. It's really what's happening locally in terms of transformation, but also of food choices. When people are eating animals that are higher in the food web, they are more exposed to this. And as you know better than me, there's a lot of roles that the country food can have. It's not just a food of source of nutrients, it's also very important socio-culturally for people there. And with time, they are kind of breaking their link with the land because of this risk of being contaminated when they eat food from the land. And because of that, more and more, I'm trying to balance the risk of exposure to contaminants with the benefits from eating them. Because up north right now, there's an increase in diabetes. There are anemia going on, and also some problems with calcium intake through diet because people are moving away from traditional country food because of the risk associated with it. And more and more we are exploiting the north also, so there is a trend right now to increase mining of rare earth elements up north, which could be a new source of rare earth elements in the environment, but also of radionuclides. And also because of the energy transition, we want to promote hydroelectricity. And again, hydroelectricity is done mostly on indigenous land, and it promotes the formation of methyl mercury, which then ends up in fish and represent a significant source for decades after flooding. So in this context, it's important to work more and more with indigenous people. And here I wanted to show an example of what has been going on in Kangiswalujjuaq, which is an Inuit village on the Ongava Bay in Canada. And this was initially led by the community and by people from Université du Québec at Trois-Rivières. So for about 10 years now, we've been collaborating with them so that they will choose the next research project that we will be doing. So initially, the first research project that they decided to do, their big concern was rare earth mining, because there was a mine that was supposed to be built in their landscape, still a clear possibility. So with them, there were workshops that were done to create such a graph here, and you have the draft version here, and then the version that they are using in grant application. And you can see that it's a concentric graph where the external circle is the most critical concerns of the society, of the community regarding their environment. And then on the x-axis, you have the feasibility. So here, for instance, you have the more feasible research projects, and the more critical ones are here. So, for instance, one of the critical ones is air quality, dust, particles from the mine. So again, the mine is in their main concerns. So with them, we've constructed community-based environmental monitoring exercises where they collected us lichens to follow the contamination of the air, water, sediments, and also animals that they are consuming. So we've done that during the last 10 years, and now they have a big data set regarding rare earth elements that they can possess, and it's completely independent from the mining industry, the data from the mining industry. And we transferred all these data recently at a meeting in Waroux. And during the last year, we've done another exercise. It's called the Avateni project, the land that surrounds us, where we've done, for instance, sampling of 24 sites in partnership with Nunavik Parks and the community. So people from the community were in the helicopter with people from Nunavik Parks and also people from universities. And we sampled for rare earth elements, but also for eDNA in order to map the biodiversity of the sites before the implementation of the mine. And for the youth, we've also designed a science camp on the land where young people from the community are camping for about 2 weeks with elders that can share the traditional knowledge, and scientists, and also guides and cooks, and all a big group of people. And it's a way also to reconnect the elders with the youth, because this link has often been broken there. So it has been going on for about 10 years also. As I said before, we want to balance risk and benefits. So we are right now conducting a series of experiments to identify the real bioaccessibility of contaminants in food when you cook it. So when you cook it, part of it may be available, but another part may not be. So it's important to understand what's going on during food preparation. And we are also following nutrients to be sure to balance both the risk and the benefits. And in this context, we are also optimizing traditional recipes. For instance, here you have a recipe made with fish head, and pregnant women are told that the broth from this recipe is very good for their health. But since they are doing it with a very contaminated fish, traditionally, it was a question that they had. So we did experiments, we looked at the transfer of contaminants from the fish to the broth, and also we promoted the addition of algae, microalgae, and mussels to the recipe to increase the intake of calcium and iron, because those are two deficient elements in their diet when they are not consuming enough country food. So I will simply reiterate the key points of this presentation. First of all, even if they are living very far away, Inuit people are really exposed to very high levels of contaminants from their food intake in such a way that they are even eating less and less of it. And this is caused by long-range atmospheric and oceanic transport, but also by new activities related to the energy transition. And it's really important to partner with First People to decide with them what are the key questions that are of interest to them in order for the results to be really integrated and efficiently used by them. And I think that we should still promote the consumption of country food. It's the best food there is in these remote places where food is coming by plane during the winter. And in fact, there are many cases where there's a problem with food access. Maybe many people there do not eat as they should, as much as they should. And that's all for me.
Thank you very much, Marc. I have a question for you. And first of all, congratulate you for that long-term engagement with the communities and that sense of ethics and responsibility that you transfer there. And I was wondering if you could share a little bit more about, my name is Claudia Calderon and I'm from the University of Wisconsin. And I was wondering if you could share a little bit about how to balance monitoring for biodiversity and preventing the risk of bioprospection. And I think that you mentioned you have this research agreement from your university with the First Nations, but then there needs to be like some sort of understanding of how data is going to be used and shared and who has access to that. And I was wondering if you could share a little bit about that.
It's a very good question, and we have research agreements with, in particular, the community of Kajiswalujuak, and it was we had to discuss with them because they don't have the same perception of what science data is. Like in Canada right now and everywhere in the world, usually we are pushing for open science, for distribution of data right after it's collected. But from their point of view, they want ownership of the data. They don't want the mining industry to see their data. They want it for them. So we had to kind of navigate that and told them that we are also in the business of training students, and the students have to publish their work, and we are funded by taxpayers' money. So at the end, we have this agreement where it's co-ownership. They get all the data, but we still can publish it. So it's an imperfect solution, but it seems to be satisfying both parties at this time.
Thank you both for the excellent presentations. I have one question for you, Marc, regarding the topic, and it's also tied to what Claudia said and the role of government. I know about a project just recently finished, and I think it was in partnership with First Nations Cree people in Quebec, in northern Quebec, where the Ministry of Environment of Canada agreed to make a remapping, a participative mapping, to allocate the restoration funds for compensating after mining in that region. So I was wondering if in your case you have had this kind of agreements, partnerships, if there's like a kind of mapping of the mining places, but like participative mapping, and if this information has been well received by the government. Is the government involved in these projects, and how has been this going on?
Okay, I will answer something. I'm not sure I'm answering completely your question, but there is part of my colleagues are in more social sciences, and they've designed a big mapping exercise to put indigenous knowledge on maps. So, because for instance, just the name of sites, the change in the permafrost, the change in the diet of organisms that live there with climate change, that's a big concern. Climate change there is really important. For instance, the snow is changing, so it changes the way they can transport. They can go over lakes in the winter, and shrubbification of the north also is really important, the greening of the north, so they have obstacles in their usual travel ways. So sometimes there are bushes where there shouldn't be, and so there's a big exercise for mapping all indigenous knowledge, and also there is an app for northern people that is called Siku, where it's really done by the people there, and it's not really easily accessible for me, for instance. Like I will have to require access. It's for them. And they share knowledge about their environment and mapping. It's a GPS based application. So they go on the land in a snowmobile, they fish something, and they will put this on the map, and then people will know that this is accessible, etc. But the part about government, I'm not so sure I answered it.
Thank you so much to both of you for the incredible work that you have been doing. I do have a question to both, but to Yann specifically, first of all, thank you, because I am sure that the people that you have been working with live in simultaneous lives where everyone else around them does not see them. And I think I relate that also to an experience that's very far but very similar in Jordan with the shepherds and access to land around the cities and the land grabbing and displacement they've been facing. I just had a question out of curiosity. What was their livelihoods when they were on these lands, and how have they been managing? And if we have time, I have a quick question to Marc too. You mentioned you measured the eDNA before the mining project, and I was curious to know if you have already measured the after and if you've seen differences in the biodiversity of the microorganisms. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that question. That allows me to fit in some of the stuff that I should have talked about. So just very briefly, right? So this is an area where there's different social and ethnic groups, and some of them are indigenous groups. There's the Mancuni, Vaclé, and Guarani groups. But the people I was talking specifically about today are Criollo, so Mestizo group, which is indeed super invisible in the region. And that was one of the reasons I was working with them. And they are very spread around the territory, whereas the indigenous groups tend to be more in that area specifically, within specific territories that are less threatened. So the livelihoods of these people are actually not very different from their indigenous neighbors, but more focused on small-scale livestock. So herds of goats, sheep, and cows, and with a different mix for everyone. But also some historically, some hunting and gathering, some very, very small scale agriculture, and other trades as well, but culturally centered on small scale livestock herding.
And for the mine, the specific mine there is a Strange Lake mine, and it's a mining project that has been in the exploration mode for a long time. They are still on the edge. They just invested $50 million last year, I think. So they are supposed to move. The mine doesn't exist yet, so there's no. But there's already like the basic stuff, like some buildings, but they must decide how to bring the minerals up south from Seoul. At first they wanted to use a blimp, which was really innovative, but they don't know how a blimp will work in the Arctic. So finally they want to do a road that will cross through Labrador up to the east coast of Canada. So it will be disturbing for the caribou herds there, because there's a caribou herd in Peril in George River. And so that's another consequence for them culturally. So I don't have data after.
Yeah. Thank you both. We have a last comment here from Jean-Claude, and then if you have more questions, maybe during the break, you can ask.
I just wanted to thank you for two things. First, I think it's a great example of how the tools of modern science can be used to advance traditional knowledge. So that's amazing. The second thing is I thank you because you talked about cooking. Cooking is never seen as a serious object of study, and what you've shown is just amazing and shows how important it is to pay attention to the way people are cooking. So, Marc, thank you for this incredible work. And maybe one question, it's a little funny, but how do you see your work evolving now that there's growing interest to explore more the growing land? Will that provoke more and more studies on the impact of exploitation on the land? Thank you.
Well, I think I will stay in Canada for a while. We have our problems already. I'm working also in the Northwest Territory, where the first rare earth mine from Canada has been opened a couple of years ago. So we're working there also. So I expect that there will be more mining in Canada for years to come, and I don't really have to go to Greenland for work.
Merci, thank you.